got a SISDIG demo from Chris Crane and Juan Luco. And then our demo from Rob Hirschfeld at Rec N got bumped to next week, although it is the only item on next week's agenda at the moment. So we will have to make a decision at the end of this call as to whether or not we're going to have a meeting next week. So basically, I'm looking for volunteers that might have things that they want to talk about next week. So please update the meeting topics if you have something, and then we can make a decision whether or not we're going to take a rest of the year hiatus from this meeting. We have a SIG report conversation about trying to find a home for HA. Is that a new SIG? Is that a... it sounds like it's not the scaling SIG, so do we need to form a new SIG around HA? So I believe that Bob and Joe are going to have at least opinions about it, if not a plan. Then I'm going to actually give a quick CNCF Foundation update, where things are around that, and then we're going to have a discussion. Well, actually a release update for 1.2 from David Aronchik, and then a little bit of discussion around 1.3 planning. So like, what would we like to do better around 1.3 planning? How can we do it better? And getting people who are interested in that involved at this point. So why don't we go ahead and jump in with the SISDIG team? Are you good to go?
I am good to go.
Excellent.
So should I just click on share screen, right?
Yes, please. Perfect. Oh, I have to make one mention as well. We do record these, so smile on camera.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen? There should be a slide with the dark art of Kubernetes monitoring. Okay, perfect. So hi everyone, and thanks for attending this quick presentation. That will be about monitoring and troubleshooting Kubernetes. My name is Gianluca. I'm a software engineer at SISDIG, and I'm a core developer of the open source system troubleshooting tool SISDIG. So as I said today, I'm going to quickly talk about best practices and use cases for monitoring and troubleshooting Kubernetes. So I want to start with this little demo environment that I have here, which is essentially a Kubernetes cluster that is running tons of stuff in it. I'm running web applications, I'm running Java applications, I'm running a bunch of database tiers, and all these components are handled by pods, replication controller, services, and they belong to separate namespaces. So this is overall a fairly complicated infrastructure. And the problem with an infrastructure like this is that it's essentially a big troubleshooting nightmare. Because when it comes essentially to troubleshooting something like that, you will now have all your components scheduled across your cluster, and they will come and go, they will die, they will get spinned up again, and they will talk to each other using all sorts of virtual networking layers. So it becomes a big challenge to essentially see what's going on. And in the Kubernetes ecosystem, there are a pretty good... Sorry, was that a question? Just noise, because I just heard random noise.
I think it was someone joining without mute.
Oh, okay.
You're good to go.
Perfect. So in the Kubernetes ecosystem, there are a bunch of tools, as you are for sure very familiar with. The problem with this is that they export very useful but still basic system metrics. And so when it comes to do some heavy troubleshooting, most of the time you'll find yourself wanting much more, because you'll find yourself essentially wondering, for example, what kind of network activity is going on in a specific Kubernetes namespace, or what files are being touched by a specific group of pods, or what kind of transactions is your database serving inside another specific pod. And so these questions are not always easy to answer, and the best way to answer them is essentially doing some heavy troubleshooting with the good old system troubleshooting tools that we have had around for essentially decades. So you need to pick the area of the system you are interested in troubleshooting, and you need to apply them. Those tools are fairly advanced, and they can get essentially a long way in essentially pointing out what you are looking for. And this is all awesome, but the problem with that is that these tools are rarely optimized for containers. So if you've ever used those in the context of containers, you know that if you run top outside inside your OS, you just see a flat list of processes. You don't see the containers where these processes are, let alone the Kubernetes entities that are wrapped around these processes. And so I want to spend essentially the rest of this quick presentation in just showing you what we did with SISDIG, which is another tool that you can see here in the top right corner, that is instead optimized for containers and Kubernetes. So SISDIG is essentially an open source system troubleshooting tool that works by capturing system events, where system events are mainly system calls, and it allows you to filter them and run scripts on them. And it can be thought essentially as a TCP dump that doesn't work with network packets, but works with all the system calls in your system. It's, of course, completely open source, and more important for the scope of today's presentation, it has native support for Kubernetes, which has been around for the past couple of releases. And before jumping into the action, for the people who have not heard about SISDIG, let's see how it quickly works. So, as I said, this is the typical architecture where you have a bunch of processes running inside and outside the containers in your system. And SISDIG essentially works by having a little kernel module that will instrument all the system calls that are going on in the system by all the processes, and will deliver them to the SISDIG user space application that can essentially live in a separate container in this case. And so the core idea of SISDIG is that we are able to see inside the other containers from outside the other containers. And so how does this look in practice? If I drop here to a terminal, I'm not seeing any more your faces, so if you cannot see this, please say something. But in its simplest invocation, essentially, SISDIG, as I said, is a system call sniffer that will show every system call that's going on in the system. So this is not very useful or effective. So the first thing that one can do is filter the system event. If I do sysdig-l, I get access to all the dozen of filters that I can use to limit the scope of system events that get printed on screen. So I can filter, for example, on file attributes, on processes attributes, and most important for today, I can filter, for example, on Kubernetes attributes. So I can filter on name, ID, and label for pods, replication controller, services, and namespaces. And this in the context of Kubernetes can be quite useful. For example, if I now run SISDIG and I choose as a filter Kubernetes.pod.label.name equal MySQL, this will now show me on screen just the events done by a specific pod that has as a label name MySQL. And in fact, here I can see a much more limited output where I see the pod name, and I can see, of course, the typical name given to a Kubernetes pod name managed by a replication controller. I can see the process name, I can see the specific system call, and then I can see in this case, the container ID that is running inside this pod. And so overall, this is very useful. And depending on what you're looking to troubleshoot, this can be very, very effective. But sometimes you might want something that is a bit more user-friendly. And so the other option that we have with SISDIG is essentially delivering this list of system events to our Lua scripting engine, which is called essentially Chisel. And if we do this, for example, I can run with -c, and if I press tab, I get access to all the dozens of chisel that we support by default. These are simple scripts that anyone can write. And for example, let's use the top file bytes. And now we will get an output that is much more user-friendly. So this will show me the I/O of the system broken down by individual file name and by individual container name. So this is a very rich metric that with SISDIG is fairly easy to export, because we have essentially access to all the system calls with all their arguments done by all the processes in every container. And of course, I can choose, for example, to mix chisel with the Kubernetes filter. So say, for example, that I want to look at the file activity broken down by Kubernetes namespace name. And now I get the same information as before, so the I/O being done in my system, but broken down by the namespace. I can see that I have two namespaces named dev and prod on top of the default one. And so chisels are very effective to do essentially a top-down approach to troubleshooting, where you start with chisels and then you drill down into the system events. There's another way to interact with SISDIG that our users like a lot, which is SISDIG. SISDIG is our essentially curses-based interface for SISDIG. And in its standard invocation, it has an output that is similar to top, of course, where you see all the processes in the system with all the system resources that they are consuming. But notice immediately how I have this pretty handy column here called container. And so this will not show me just a flat list of processes, but this will now show me all the containers where these processes are running, and I can filter on them. Because again, for SISDIG, containers and Kubernetes are first-class citizens, so we immediately emerge them in the UI. Now, I don't particularly like these container names, because they have been chosen essentially by Kubernetes, so they contain some random IDs or something. So let's get a more user-friendly view. If I press F2, I can go into the Views panel, where I can essentially apply different views of my system depending on what I'm looking to troubleshoot. So here we are talking about Kubernetes. So for example, let's move to the Kubernetes namespaces view. And this will now show me the namespaces in my system with their ID and labels and system resources that they're consuming. And so I can keep an eye essentially on how the namespaces are affecting the resources of this single host where I'm running my application. And I can, for example, select one of them, for example, prod, and by pressing enter, I do what we call the drill down. And so we are brought to a view where we see the individual pods, like you can read here in the top left corner. I can see the individual pods that are running in this namespace, along with the resources, name, namespace, and set of labels. So this is very useful, and I can keep doing this drill down thing, which is incredibly effective. So for example, I can go to my Redis pod here, I can press enter, and now I am inside the Redis pod, and in fact I can see that this is a pod composed by a single Redis container. And if I want to see something else for this pod, I can switch to another view, for example, to the connections. And now I am able to see the individual TCP connections that this Redis pod is doing overall. And this is incredibly useful, especially because since this data is gathered from the system calls, I can press F5 and I can see what's actually going on inside these connections, which if you have ever used Redis, you recognize here that this is a simple Redis protocol. So I can see the data that is being exchanged on the actual network connection. And going back to a comparison with the traditional troubleshooting tool, this is a much faster approach than going, for example, with TCP dump and discovering which network interface corresponds to the network namespace of the pod where Redis is running, and then sniffing there, and then taking a look with Wireshark at those packets. So if you are using containers, this is very useful. we can apply essentially different views. For example, now that I'm inside the namespace, I can instead go to the replication controllers, for instance, and I can see all my replication controllers in the system, in this specific namespace. And if I drill down into one, for example, the WordPress, I'm brought to the replicas of this specific replication controller, and I can interact with them. We added some pretty cool cube control shortcuts. So if I select one pod and I press F, I'm brought down to a view where I can follow the logs generated by this pod. Or if I press B, I'm dropped into a bash shell inside the specific inside the specific WordPress replica. And so these are all meant to be essentially syntactic sugar that can help you get your things done faster. And there are essentially tons of views that are worth exploring. For example, one that I like also a lot is the SPY users that will show me all the processes that are being executed in my specific namespace, which in this case are a bunch of curl that you can see I'm essentially curling periodically all my services using the SkyDNS extension to keep the infrastructure up and running so that I have some numbers to show you. And of course, all this is not only limited to the Kubernetes application itself, but I can also use it to troubleshoot Kubernetes, the core components of Kubernetes. For example, if I go to processes and I filter by etcd, which of course is a critical component of the Kubernetes setup, I can see essentially the resources that etcd is consuming. And if I press F5, I can see the individual requests that etcd is serving, which in this case are simple requests done by SkyDNS. So if I see that etcd is overloaded, I can take a quick look at this echo mode to essentially see if everything is as I would expect. And so overall, this is pretty much what I wanted to show you and concludes my quick presentation. If you're with me still, essentially you'll find yourself wondering what happens if I'm in a multi-node environment, because obviously you might not want to SSH into all your hundreds of nodes of your Kubernetes cluster and do troubleshooting like I showed. And so for this, Chris will do another quick presentation that will be even more interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Gianluca. All right, let me share my screen here. So hopefully this is coming through now. Hi everyone, my name is Chris. I run product here at SISDIG, and we're running low on time, so I'm going to keep this really quick. But I wanted to give you just a little bit of a taste of what we're able to do when you take this technology and apply it across a cluster of nodes as opposed to just a single node. So what you see here is Sisted Cloud. The way Sisted Cloud works is we have an agent container that's essentially based on our open source technology. You deploy that container on each node in your environment that you want to monitor, and we're able to summarize the performance data out of that really rich set of data that we're collecting that Gianluca showed you, compress that, encrypt it, and ship it out so that we can aggregate it all together here and put some intelligence and visualizations on top of it. And so what we've really built with Sisted Cloud is what we believe at least is the first and only comprehensive monitoring solution that's really built from the ground up to be container native. And on top of that, we've added the comprehensive Kubernetes support that you saw in the open source tool. So what you see here is now a cluster of nodes that's very similar to the environment Gianluca was looking at. In this case, we've got a master machine and 3 EC2 instances that are serving as the shared pool of resources for this Kubernetes cluster. But what I can do now is start to dig down in here, and I can get all the way down to the container level on each one of these machines. And then I can click into any container or at any level of this hierarchy and start to get dashboards and configure alerts on the metrics that are being collected here. I want to show you one other view that I think is pretty cool. What you're looking at here is what we call the map view or the topology view. We're able to automatically generate this dependency map of all the different nodes that we see in your environment. What I can do now is start to zoom in on my minion cluster here. So now I see the 3 EC2 instances, and I can see the network traffic and dependencies shared between them. But where this gets really cool is I can go inside the machine, and now I see this, this scattering of containers that have been scheduled on this machine and how they're interacting with each other. Now, similar to the scattering that Gianluca was showing before, this isn't really useful if I'm trying to get an application perspective of my containers. So what we've done is add the Kubernetes context into Sisted Cloud. So what I'll do now is switch to a semantic map, which is going to use the logical tiers of the Kubernetes hierarchy to investigate the system while abstracting away the underlying physical architecture. So now I'm looking at namespaces in this cluster. If I zoom in on the production namespace, now it's suddenly really clear what's going on. So I can see all the different applications and microservices that are running. I can see the dependencies between them. In this case, I'm looking at a replication controller for WordPress, for example. When I zoom inside, I can see the WordPress service that's balancing load across 3 pods. And I can get inside the pods and see the containers. And then within the containers, I can get all the way down to the process level. But really importantly, what this lets me do is monitor the performance of my services at the service level, despite the fact that these containers are scheduled arbitrarily across the services underneath. And what that really enables me to do is cool things like this, where I can create a dashboard for an application, in this case, Cassandra. And despite the fact that my Cassandra containers are scattered across a variety of EC2 nodes, I now have this holistic overview of all the metrics that I really care about in this application. Now, there's dozens of applications that we support right out of the box. All you do is just deploy your container in there. We're going to automatically discover all the services that are running and start pulling metrics from them. And that's another unique thing about Sisted Cloud that's not actually in the open source tool, which is these application plugins that we apply automatically to start pulling actual application level data from whatever you're running. So I'm going to leave it at that so that we can move on to other topics. But yeah, thanks for the time. And feel free to check out open source Sysdig at sistig.org. Or if you want a free trial of Sisted Cloud, you can go to sistig.com. And please reach out to Gianluca or I with any questions. Thanks.
We've got time for like 2 questions if people wanted to do that now, or we can move on and you guys can field questions offline. Are there any burning questions? Let me go with that from participants. Anybody on mute and having a burning question? All right. Well, we will go ahead on to the next things. As I said, we will have the rec and demo next week, providing we decide we want to have a meeting. So the next topic on the agenda was scaling SIG and the home for HA, because HA doesn't fit in scaling SIG. So Joe or Bob, do you guys want to field that?
Hey there. Well, I'll take a first crack at it, and Joe can keep me honest.
Sweet.
And I think actually there are probably 2 SIG-related topics that we'd like to cover. If we have time, I'm happy to give a little bit more of an update as to what the scalability SIG itself has been doing, but let's start with the community-based thing. So 2 things. The HA one. So early on, scalability was the first SIG that got going, and HA was of interest, and so we agreed kind of informally that the scalability SIG would be the hopefully temporary home for HA. And Tim St. Clair has been, I'll say, leading. I don't want to sound too pompous about it, but he's been leading the subcommittee of the HA subcommittee. So I don't think, unless I'm behind here, I don't think there's been an effort to actually create an HA SIG specifically, but I think a lot of us would like to see that happen.
Okay. We certainly need to, if we have to find out if Tim is happy to continue leading it and promote out to a full-blown SIG, because I know he pays attention to a lot of the SIGs. He may not answer us today, that's fine, not on the spot, but we need that, and then we need to identify the right person from inside Google to participate with that.
So that would be great. I think the second community SIG thing that I wanted to point out is that there's a new scheduler SIG, and the scalability group to date has spent a lot of time on scheduler-based issues, and so we're working diligently to figure out how we can collaborate with the scheduler SIG in most helpful way. So that one's the scalability SIG is new, so I think we're still working on that.
Hey, Bob, I just sent a scheduler PR improvement that you guys might want to check out last night after looking at some profiles that the Polish guys did.
Yeah.
So just so
Very
you
good.
know.
Super, thank you. Would you like me to just give like a super quick update as to what's been going on in scalability land? Do we have time?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
we've got a couple of minutes.
But yeah, if we have a couple of minutes, so I just wanted to try to hit some highlights, and certainly hit up Joe or me or hop onto the Slack channel and ask if you need some more detail. I think there's been some of these things are sort of I won't say peripherally involved, but there's sort of tangents that have kicked off inside the scalability group because someone's like picked some thread and run with it. So one is that I think we're getting close on a storage abstraction that would let us swap something else in for etcd. And one of the things we're really interested in is like an in-memory, an in-memory plugin of some kind so that we can use that for performance analysis. The CoreOS guys have been doing a lot of kind of granular component level analysis of the scheduler, and they found some really interesting stuff. Just wanted to give them a shout out on some really good work around making sure the math libraries were properly configured. I think they saw like a 40% performance improvement with which was a small change to make, but a hard change to find. We've been having a lot of discussion around performance metric sharing, and I think we're still trying to figure that out. One of the critical things there that's kind of a community-wide thing of interest is there's a PR, I think it's 14916, which is a way to take all of the configuration parameters for an entire Kubernetes cluster and dump them. And the link to the scalability topic is as we figure out how to publish performance results, we want to make sure that we have a great way to explain exactly what the configuration was that generated that performance. So that's one that we're super interested in. I don't think anyone in the scalability SIG has yet kind of taken it on to chase the ground, but we'd certainly love to see someone do that. Another thing that's some of us have spent a fair bit of time on, and in fact I ended up having a lot of conversations last week at the Tectonic/CNCF was about journal D performance. So we spent a lot of time trying to chase the stair-stepping and some performance issues in the scheduler. And at the end of the day, it has turned into sort of throughput issues on journal D. I think the CoreOS folks, so we're kind of swapping over to like a rotating log kind of setup, old school. But I think the CoreOS and Red Hat folks that I talked to last week were sounding pretty motivated to work with the journal D contributors to see in the coming months if there was not some architectural improvements that could be made for performance. So I think, let me just check my notes here. I think that was all I had. Did I miss anything, Joe, that you think was worth mentioning here?
No, I think that's good. I think the only thing to mention is that the storage abstraction stuff is done, but the memory backend is still a glimmer in at least somebody's eye. I don't know, mine. Still need to find an owner for that.
Great. So again,
and thanks to Tim for doing that stuff. That was a ton of work, but I think it's going to pay dividends in a lot of places.
Great. So again, if you're interested in any of those topics, don't be shy reaching out. I can try to plug you into the details or reach out to Joe as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. So if anybody has any questions for the scalability SIG, you can of course find them on Slack or people. And then my next question is, are there any other SIGs? We're running a couple of minutes ahead of time. So are there any other SIGs that wanted to do a report out today, something that's been going on? Because I know there's been a lot of SIG activity in the last 2 weeks.
I don't know if Jack's on, but I can give a quick SIG config update.
Cool.
We've met twice at this point. We are, hastily bike shedding as fast as we can. No, actually, I think that we've actually made a bunch of progress by discussing. We did some demos on the first time and had some discussions about things on yesterday. I think that what we're going to try and do is take some of the work that various people have done and try and coalesce it into a single concrete proposal, and actually to sort of fork the discussion into to discuss sort of the stages of templating and the stages of config in one, and then as a separate topic, the topic of sort of client side versus server side, because those are kind of the two big contentious points, I think, and I think it makes sense to discuss them as separate entities, because I think we can achieve. They're just orthogonal. And so I'm going to work with some of the Red Hat folks, and other people are going to work to kind of come up with a cohesive proposal and get that in time for the next meeting that we'll have next Wednesday. So hopefully anybody who's interested can see the sort of coalesced community proposal around these topics sometime soon.
Cool, thank you. Configuration SIGs then. Clearly, Jack and Brendan have been working on those, and they have, you can of course find them or participate, Slack, mailing lists, all the usual things. We're trying to standardize all of that. And if there are some of you who want to participate more actively, please do join up. Lots of work seems to be happening in those smaller groups, which is great. Are there any other SIGs that wanted to do a quick report out?
Well, we had a first meeting of the scheduling SIG. Nothing too exciting to report. We just discussed some of the open issues in scheduling and did some introductions, and most of the discussion is going on in GitHub issues. Tim Sinclair took some notes on the meeting for people who are interested, and I didn't review them yet. I was going to attach some issue numbers to that. I will do that soon. Yeah, so we're starting up the scheduling SIG meetings, and there's information on the wiki if you want to join the mailing list, as with all the other SIGs, how to join the mailing list for the SIG. So I think that's about it.
This is Mark. I'll talk about the storage SIG. We've
Awesome.
also met twice. The conversation so far has been focused around flex volume and dynamic provisioning. And with regards to those, where do the plugins live, and how can we make extensibility, how can we make all of it extensible, and so on. And a lot of that has to do with flex volume. That's really about it. 18.333 is the issue where all of these things are being hashed out in the larger sense. And it deals with how the controllers are going to be run, whether we have one or many. Likewise, where the plugins are going to live. Are they in tree? Are they out of tree? A hybrid between? And all that's being hashed out now in 18.333. And that's what we've done so far in the storage SIG. And I also owe notes to the the community docs.
Awesome. One line into the community meeting topics notes would also be great from each of you. Just to go under the what you did and what you think the high points are. Anybody else? That's awesome. We got through 4.
This is Carl. I've been meaning to start up a testing SIG, but I think it's not going to happen until January. We have some stuff to discuss there in terms of conformance testing and whether we're going to extract them to separate repositories and how we're going to version them and how we're going to test versions of conformance versus master conformance. Some of that's been going on in PRs sort of asynchronously, but we probably need to start powwowing. So if you're interested in discussing that, make sure you're on the mailing list and we'll try to organize there.
Hey, I was going to say, this is Bob again. As it might not surprise you, we had a lot of discussion around testing and conformance testing, kind of limited to the scaling scope. So I'd love to touch base with you and catch you up on some of our discussions there.
Sounds great. Why don't you ping me on Slack? We can figure it out. Another question on scheduling. Now that we have a bunch of SIGs, did anyone figure out a great way for actually figuring out when people can meet?
So there are a couple of ways, and it depends on what you mean. Generally, what people have been doing is asking the mailing list by proposing a couple of dates and then seeing where where time in the group coalesces. There is a tool called Doodle, where you can set a bunch of possible times in it and then have a group go vote, basically, and you can see that. So I've had really good luck with that. But I have a spreadsheet that is mostly up to date, but of course, with people moving things around with the holidays, it's not quite accurate always. Having all of the different SIGs and when the expected scheduled time is and when the next time is. Now, I need to go update it again this week. And that is going to end up out onto GitHub, not as a spreadsheet, but as a document in GitHub about all the different SIGs. And then once that's all propagated, each of the SIGs can, or once that's all out there, the SIGs can look at what else is going on at different times, and you can compare where other SIGs are meeting as well. So I'm trying to make sure that we have one Google person who's helping lead each of the SIGs, one or more community people helping to lead each of the SIGs, have email lists, Slack channels, just all of the administrative trivia that needs to go around this so that we have a clear view of when these are meeting and who to contact in the event you want to interact with them, and then make it as publicly available as possible. But I would take a peek at Doodle. I think it's doodle.com as a way to check what dates and times people can do. You basically have to present a few possibilities and then people can vote.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Any other SIGs quick, or shall we move on? All right. Well, I will give a very short update on the Cloud Native Compute Foundation and where that stands, because Craig can't join us today, unfortunately. And then we can move on for sort of the meat of the discussion, 15 or 20 minutes about what's coming up in 1.2 and some conversation about how we can help get more community involvement in the 1.3 planning. So the Cloud Native Compute Foundation update is last week at Tectonic Summit, as Bob mentioned, was the first governing board meeting and general technical conversation around the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. Now, for any of you who don't remember, Cloud Native Compute Foundation was announced last July, and that is where the Kubernetes project is going to live, we expect. Now, that leads me to the first act of the governing board, other than setting up an agreement as to what it meant to have a Cloud Native Compute Foundation. The first thing that the governing board is doing is trying to seat a technical oversight committee, and that's going to be 9 people. Craig describes it as the Supreme Court justices of tech, who will try to define clearly what we mean by cloud native and what components need to be included in what, or can choose to be included in cloud native applications, and what best practices are, decreasing confusion. This is not anointing winners. We think that would actually only increase confusion, but instead giving good taxonomy, good language, and good leadership around what it really means to be cloud native. So nominations for this technical oversight committee are open right now, and anyone who is a member of the Cloud Native Compute Foundation can nominate people for that, for the technical oversight committee. We're really looking for the people who have been there, done that, and know lots about the function of cloud native and what can get you from where you might be to cloud native, or even as greenfield starting in cloud native. So if you are interested in, or think you know someone that should be nominated for the technical oversight committee, find someone who is a member of the Cloud Native Compute Foundation and talk about nominations. The other thing that's happening right now is the voting for a governing board chairperson, but that's just will get us again further down the governance. The idea, though, is to focus on inventorying the whole space of cloud native, decreasing confusion, and defining what it means to be a cloud native application and defining what it means to be a cloud native project, which is why I said we expect Kubernetes will land there, but the technical oversight committee is actually going to be the group that decides what projects which have been offered to the foundation are accepted or not. The other thing that is getting started right now is the end user technical advisory board. This is we're trying to do this and we think it should help this way. These are the pain points we're having. It's more about the users as opposed to the development side of the cloud native infrastructure. So that is the very short version of that. Bob, you were in the meeting in the afternoon. Did I miss anything exciting?
You made it sound a whole lot more exciting than it actually was, I think. That was
wow,
great.
okay, fantastic. This is why I've been an evangelist for years. All right, so next thing is we've got 18 minutes to talk through 1.2 and the beginnings of the 1.3 planning and how we can do better with that. So David, are you ready?
I am. Hi, everyone. Can you see me? Let's just sneak down here. All right. So, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, our goal is to make the 1.2 and future planning much more in the public. And, right now we don't even really have the tools necessary to accomplish that today. Our goal is, what we've done so far is basically looked at many of the major contributions that are currently in the 1.2 and 1.2 candidate camps, collected them into kind of a single document, which I will be sharing in just a second, and said, well, broad strokes, this is what looks like blockers, this is what looks like nice to have. We're going to do a mapping of this into GitHub, and then GitHub will be the repository of these 1.2 activities, with every one of them associated with an overall GitHub work item. Now, I guess I could go through and share that now, just so you guys see what it is. I will say that this is by no means exclusive. Like, there could be other things that appear as part of 1.2, but as it stands, this is what it looks like right now. How does that work? Can you guys see that? Anyone?
It's really small.
Sort of small. How about if I do this? Is this better?
That is a little smaller for me.
Zoom to full width.
Well, that's the problem. I was at full width, and I thought, how about that?
You may just need to kick the font size up, yeah.
Ooh, that works.
Yeah, that's
Is that
better.
good?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So as I was saying, the goal here is not to be to cover every work item that is projected. Our goal is to highlight the things that we know, that we're fairly confident. Even now, we're not saying that this is a lock right now, but that we're fairly confident are blockers, and then those that are nice to have. Again, I stress again that there will be a guaranteed additional work that comes in. And I guarantee that some of these will not make it. This is, we're trying to be responsive to what works in the community. So I won't go through these all in detail right now, but the blockers and the things that we want to hang our hat on for 1.2 basically center around three big areas. The first is around performance and scale. You can see some items here that are associated with that. The second is around ease of use, including our new GUI and some other things that the system's going to do on your behalf. And then the third is around developer velocity and kind of paying down technical debt. And so you can see some of the items there. We also have a couple of similar miscellaneous items that I wasn't sure where they fit. They were fairly small, but the teams that identified them did identify them as blockers. Then we have a few more that are in the nice to have category. And I didn't associate these with themes, but these are the kind of things that we expect to have be picked up over time. If there's the available space. And again, we're not. This is a community. We're not dictating like this must come in or this must not come in. If you want to work on something that is like incredibly low priority, knock yourself out if it makes you happy. But suffice it to say that there are a set of things and a set of groupings that we really want to make progress against, particularly in the 1-2 time frame. So this will migrate over to our overall roadmap document out there in the world and be very public. It will also be tied into GitHub. And then it comes to 1.3. I know not to develop too far into the future, but around 1.3, obviously one of the goals that we have here truly is not doing this thing in some smoke-filled room, to really do all this stuff in public. And so around 1.3, we're going to do something similar, propose a set of themes, a fairly small set of themes that we as the community can get behind, decide which themes are the best ones, and then have folks fill in space behind them to see if it feels like it's valuable. So with that, I'll leave it open for discussion. Does this feel natural to the community? Are there things that we can do to improve this? You name it.
Hey, Bob Wise here. Can I encourage you in the strongest possible way to just publish this, just share this out to the community? I think it's going to be really hard to react to this without actually like reading through it, looking at it, and thinking about it a bit.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. This is gonna happen momentarily. If not today, then certainly by the end of the week.
All right. Thank you.
So, and when you say you don't have the tooling to be more transparent, what does that mean exactly?
Well, so I guess we're having a fair number of discussions about that. Right now we would argue, I would certainly argue that something like this, a Google Doc is probably not the best way to share, get comments, things like that back and forth, to have a deep discussion about things, to keep things in sync with GitHub, where obviously all the activity has. What I am suggesting is that we want to identify a tool that can solve all those problems, where all this stuff actually does happen in the community, where there are concepts like voting and threaded discussions and integrated with GitHub and tracking assignees and all that kind of stuff.
There's a lot of discussions right now about possible process changes and making this way more transparent and way more collaborative. For those of you who don't know, I've joined Google just about 6 weeks ago, and one of my core tasks is to make sure that Google is not perceived as guiding, pushing the owner of Kubernetes. So I get to spend my days in meetings saying, so why didn't we have this conversation publicly? And so the more often I say that, the more we look at the tooling and the processes. So as a very short answer, next week in 2 weeks, I have meetings scheduled for just to go through what are the existing processes that we have and how can we make them different, more transparent, better. The one that has come up a number of times in my conversations has been sort of the request for comment on a feature. Right now they're going into GitHub issues. That's a huge pain. They're not exactly, or pull requests even, they're not exactly handled well, or as well as they could be. The conversations feel opaque. So we're going to look at how we might be able to make this better, come back to the community and say, does this fit? Lots and lots of iteration around process. So 1.3 isn't going to be perfect, but hopefully it will be different from 1.2 and moving in the right direction. So feedback on all of this is really helpful, and not just feedback like, we want this to be more transparent, but hey, I've used a tool like this that might be really helpful, would also be very useful. hey, documenting as you go during discovery, even if they're not great processes, would be appreciated. Yes. So we're trying to get better also about saying this isn't 100%, but here, this is what we've got so far. Please comment.
Yep.
Anybody else want to pipe in? Because we do.
Joe, did that get at what you were looking for? Your little square was kind of small.
Joe?
Okay.
Okay. Fantastic.
Sorry.
No problem.
One of the big processes that I would like to figure out in the next couple of weeks or months is also how do we onboard people who want to help contribute. So, for example, how do we make this nice and shiny and easy to bring new people in and help us and get things moving forward? So we got lots and lots of work because there does certainly seem to be feelings that if you aren't already part of the team that is contributing, it's really hard to get started. So that's why I keep saying things over and over like, hey, Slack channel, hey, email list, hey, join us at events. It's just repeat. All right, any other topics? We've got just a couple of minutes. And then I have
a question. This
Sure.
is Andy Goldstein. Do we have any sort of rough guess for the 1.2 release date? Something that we're targeting?
We do. Actually, I will. So, without question, is Q1. I don't know if we've shared publicly, and again, this is something that the community decides. It's not us. But we kind of did some mental math here internally. But it is certainly Q1. It is certainly 3 months post 1.1 release. The question is how much beyond 1.1 release, 1.1 plus 3 months
+3.
it is. We'll likely, as part of this, make a proposal to the community and see what everyone thinks.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, one of the things we agreed to at a community meetup probably about a year ago was we wanted about 3 or 4 months between minor point releases. So when trying to schedule like what we should look at for 1.2, like the goal was what can we do to keep that schedule of 3 to 4 months between minor releases.
Another thing to tie into this is that we are looking to do, again, a more collaborative, bring all of the contributors, and that's a broad description of contributors, together in a way that is different and able to have sort of unconferencey conversations. And that will be also in first quarter, but I expect and hope it will be shortly after the 1.3 release, or 1.2 release.
One suggestion I have for the 1.2 release is if you could, for some future community hangout, if somebody could describe what the release process is and where we are in that, I think that would be super helpful. I know there are some issues and PRs ongoing to sort of modify this, but again, just figuring out what it is today and what the plan is for 1.2 would be super helpful.
Which leads me to my closing question, unless people have more comments, but we can touch on this now, is do we want to have a meeting on the 17th? Because we have one demo that is scheduled right now. I won't be able to attend, so we would also need to identify a moderator and someone that'll send out the agenda and all of that. As well as a couple more things like SIGs that want to report out. We could potentially do the release process information then, or we could say most people will be gone by the 17th or trying to close out the things they need to before the holidays, so let's skip it. What do you guys want to do about the 17th?
I vote for no meeting on the 17th.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Voting for skips in the chat room and voting for the release process after the new year as a good reset. I have not heard a single voice say, no, I really want a meeting on the 17th. Is there anyone who wants that?
That said, maybe we could send an email on the 17th. If SIGs have particular things, we'll send a link to this in case anyone missed it, that kind of stuff.
The 25th. Yes, we've already canceled the 25th. Thank you. We've canceled, or the 24th and the 31st. So it sounds like we're good to go for the rest of the year, and we will kick off the new year with a release process. We'll move the rack end demo out to then, and then we will have more things in the new year.
And just a hiring proposal. If anyone does want to come work at Google, we're awesome, and we have private screenings for the Star Wars. Just FYI.
Okay, and David, if you keep hiring the community, you can't make this a community-driven project.
No, you see, there's an infinite community, and it just keeps filling itself.
All right, well, happy holidays of any sort you choose to celebrate, and we will see you guys in the new year. Bye.
Thanks. Happy holidays.
Bye.